Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Just before we start, one of our members called Lindy this afternoon and told her that she was heartbroken because her first grandchild, who's only 3 weeks old, has they found a tumor, and the baby has to be operated on, and God willing, the tumor will turn out to be benign, but it's not clear yet. And she asked and begged that we should all pray for this little girl, Devorah Bat Zelda, and pray with all of our hearts that Devorah Bat Zelda should grow up to be a good, strong, healthy young woman, that the tumor should not affect her, should be benign, and that there should be a good outcome to her operation. And so all of us collectively will say Devorah Bat Zelda should have a refuah shlema, complete, speedy, complete, and painless recovery to her, to her parent, to her grandparent, to her parents, and of course to her grandmother as well.
Amen.
Thank you. So covenant is different to mitzvah. In a mitzvah, there's a commander and a commanded, but covenant transcends this inequality, this disparity, and it creates a sacred and a lasting undertaking between the parties to the covenant. As we come to the end of the 5 books of Moses, we've already encountered a number of covenants throughout the Bible. The first, of course, was the covenant that God made with Noah, not to destroy the world by flood, and reciprocally Noah understood to fulfill the 7 Noahide laws, the laws that apply to all of humanity. A little bit later on, God makes a covenant with Abraham at the Brit Bein HaBetarim, the covenant of the pieces, at which Abraham is told that his descendants will be enslaved, but will ultimately be liberated. At Sinai, of course, the Jewish nation covenant with God to be his chosen messengers to mankind. And if you look at these covenants, you see there is actually a progression in them. Noah was a completely passive recipient of the covenant. Abraham participated in his covenant by the act of circumcision. And at Sinai, we went one step further. The covenant was only sealed when the Jewish people actually verbally took it on and they said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we undertake to practice and to understand your Torah. Well, in last week's parasha, we read a description of some of the physical arrangements of a covenant that the people would enter into after they'd crossed the Jordan under the leadership of Joshua, and after they'd entered the land of Israel. And Moses described, if you recall from my sermonette last week, how the entire nation would be ranged on 2 mountains, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, and the ark and the Levites would be in the valley between them, and there'd be this dramatic entering into a covenant. Now, in our parsha this week, Nitzavim, we learn more about that covenant, and we learn about its content. Says Moses, Atem Nitzavim Hayom, you are standing here today, the entire nation, all of you together, your elders, the tribes, your officers, the children, your wives, the stranger in your midst, all of you. And what is the purpose of all of this? La avracha bebrit, to enter into a covenant. And the Torah goes on to describe the nature of this covenant. You will be his people, and he will be your God. But what distinguishes this covenant from all the others that preceded it is that this one is actually initiated by the people, not by God. Because 40 years after leaving Egypt, on the eve of the entry into the land, the nation now no longer just accept God, now they're ready to actively choose him. But there's another feature of this covenant, an extraordinary feature, a very inspirational feature. And it is deeply hidden in the last verse of chapter 29. The verse reads as follows, Hanistarot la'Adonai v'neglot lanu ulvanenu. The concealed is for the Lord our God, but the revealed are for us and for our children forever to perform all the matters of the Torah. Now, when you look at these words in the Torah, the words lanu ulvanenu ad, we and our children for, there are little dots above each one of these letters. There are 11 little dots mysteriously above these words. the letters of these words. And as a matter of fact, you can see it even in our printed Chumashim. And the question is, what do these dots mean? So the sages explain that the phenomenon of dots above words, and there are 10 other instances in the Torah where these sorts of dots occur, indicate that the words that are dotted should not actually be in the Torah. And if that's the case, there are two ways to read this verse in which these dots appear. We can read the verse with the words that have the dots, or we can read them without the words that are dotted. Now let's try and look at this verse over here and see how it works both ways. So to put into context, in the preceding verses, Moses has lectured at length about the collective punishment that will be exacted by God if individual members of the nation fail to observe his commandments. And our verse now is making a distinction between two kinds of actions: nistarot, hidden actions that one can't see, no one can see them, and nigalot, actions performed openly and seen by all. And therefore the verse tells us, in the first part of the verse, hanistarot la'Adonai, the concealed is for God. You can't be held responsible for sins committed by other people in private that are concealed from God. How could you possibly know what is going on in another person's heart or what is happening behind their closed doors? And therefore you won't be held responsible for those sins. They are for God to take care of. But what about those things which happen in society that are committed publicly and of which everyone is aware? What shall we do about those? Now, there are two ways to read the next part of the verse: with the words that have dots, or as if the words were not present, which is what the dots indicate. So remove the dotted words completely from this verse, and you read as follows: hanistarot la'Adonai v'haniglot, both the hidden and the revealed sins are for God to deal with. An individual will not be punished for his neighbor's behavior. Put the words back in the verse, and then it reads completely differently. Hanistarot la'Adonai, the hidden sins God will take care of. V'haniglot, but the sins which are open and in society and all around you, lanu, are there for you to take care of, and your children. You and your children will be responsible for those sins which are committed in society and of which you are aware, and they are seen by all. So there are two ways to read this verse, and they have entirely different meanings. So which is it? Here is the great idea of this covenant. Says Moses, the Torah itself, while you are here on this side of the Jordan, before you enter the land, read the verse as if the words were not there. Each one of you at this moment is responsible only for your own soul, not for your neighbors. But after you enter the land, when this covenant is eventually entered into under the leadership of Joshua at Mount Gerizim and at Mount Ebal, from the moment you enter the land, this covenant that you've initiated will embrace an extraordinary undertaking. Each one of you will become responsible for the other as if you are part of one single large family. You will be held accountable for failing to notice when your neighbor's struggling and for not doing anything to help that human being. This mutuality enshrined in covenant is one that from the moment we enter the land would define the Jewish people from this point onwards for all time. And that's the way it is in Israel to this very day, as you know. The sense that they are one single family, and when there's a tragedy or a simcha, everyone shares in it. There is a sense of covenantal mutuality and engagement one with the other and concern one for the other. And what does it have to do with us? Well, that is the reason why this parsha is always read every year on the Shabbat before Rosh Hashanah. Because on Rosh Hashanah, we come back, all of us, into our synagogues, even those who've been absent the entire year. And we stand together. And once again, we feel ourselves part of one people. We feel ourselves there for each other, part of this special, extraordinary family which is called being Jewish. It is part of the covenant of mutuality that defines our lives and our identity and our relationship with other Jews and Jewesses throughout the world to this very day. And that was the covenant that the people entered into when they became a nation in our own land, in the land of Israel, and that we carried through even after we left our land for 2,000 years of diaspora to this very day. And today, in the land and outside the land, we have held to that wonderful, special, extraordinary, and unique covenant of mutuality and care one for the other, and responsibility one for the other. Shabbat Shalom and Shana Tova. We should meet together just before Yom Tov and celebrate and be together throughout those special days. If you can not join us in Shul, you'll join us on Zoom, and we'll be uplifted together and care for each other as we always have. Shabbat Shalom.